section. Thank you very much. Perfect. So what we have arranged for you today are 4 speakers to speak on 3 topics related to the criteria for the FRQ for this social mobilization section of the training awards that's being required this year. Each of them is going to speak for about 10 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up basically to breakout rooms where you'll be able to go and ask more direct questions about your application and brainstorm a little bit with others as well as with the speakers about how you're going to approach this section on your training award application. Hopefully, if you registered in advance for this session, we did provide the document that outlined this new evaluation criteria and gave maybe a little bit more of advance reading. You would have had a sense of what this session is going to involve, but hopefully you maybe have that on hand to refer to during today's session. I want to allow our speakers to introduce themselves. Maybe we'll do that now if Sean's also on the call, and if not, we can do that as they go through, but we're going to divide this into, like I said, 3 topics. So Dimitri's here to talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Danielle's going to talk about being an engaged citizen, and Sean and Vanessa are going to talk about increasing dialogue between science and society, which if you're referring to that document, you'll see those are really the 3 sub-criteria for this new social mobilization criteria for the training award evaluations. So without further ado, should we introduce all of our speakers first? Dimitri, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure, it will be my pleasure. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me to this meeting. It's a pleasure to meet you all to discuss the UN Sustainable Goals. It's a new feature that we have on FRQ applications. So it's a really exciting opportunity for all of us to learn a little bit about it and to exchange some ideas about the best approach, how to write the applications, since we've never done it before. So a little bit about myself. I'm also a PhD from McGill University, did my PhD in biochemistry, worked a lot on cell biology and oncology at the Goodman Cancer Center. Later on, I was more interested by the commercial side of things and translational research. I was involved a lot in entrepreneurship and completed my MBA at the HEC Montreal in 2019. I also have worked in consulting, and one of my parallel interests is, of course, corporate social responsibility, environmental social justice. This is something that I've been involved a lot in the last 5 years or so. And based on that knowledge, I'd be happy to talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals today. Thank you.
Great. Danielle, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle. So I graduated from my master's at McGill in neuroscience in January. I worked at the Montreal General Hospital, and I was, like you, recently participated in a lot of DCAT events. And I'm here today to talk about some of the things, the activities I was involved in as a grad student, how I kind of balanced that with my research work, and hopefully I can help you brainstorm some ideas of what you might want to get involved in throughout your degree.
Great, thank you. Vanessa.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks for having me today, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm always excited to talk to students because I feel like I was there in your shoes not that long ago. So I am currently a science policy advisor in the Office of the Chief Science Advisor. I also did my PhD at McGill at the Goodman Cancer Center in biochemistry and cancer biology. And yeah, as mentioned, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about how you can think about how you can engage in activities that would, as the criteria says, increase dialogue between science and society. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. And is Sean, I don't see Sean on the call yet, so he's going to join us in a minute. He had
I'm right here.
Oh, you are there. Okay, there's a long list of people to scroll down. Thanks for speaking up. Go ahead, Sean. Do you want to introduce yourself?
You got it. I mean, it's a bit of a broken record. Also, PhD biochemistry, Goodman Cancer Research Center. So copy pasting that from Dimitri and Vanessa. I'm currently a senior policy advisor at NSERC, Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada. I've been there for 3 years and came in through a MITEX policy fellowship, and hoping to give some good advice at this session. And I hopefully, if I did it well, I can try to close it up with looking at how I would have applied to FRQ at the time back in 2013 when I applied for my doctoral award at that point.
Great, thank you so much. I put it in the chat, but I think it goes, I have to say it, it's amazing. McGill has amazing alumni, and it's so fabulous to be able to have all of you that have a great expertise in these areas to be able to come back and share with our students. And if you haven't already noticed, there's a large contingent of students. We have over 70 students on this call. So definitely a lot of interest in knowing your advice and how you, as experts in this area, really would approach this. Like Sean said, if you were back in their shoes, having to now apply to this award today. So I think we'll get started. Dimitri's up first and is going to present a little bit to set the stage on UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
If you have questions throughout, you can maybe put them in the chat, and I'll try to monitor the chat as well. But we may hold questions until after each presentation.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so I'll share my screen, my presentation. One thing I forgot to mention is my current occupation, and I apologize for that. So I'm working as a project manager at the Business Development Office of a Research Institute of McGill University Health Center, MUHC. So if you have any questions related to that topic, we can have a conversation, but it will be for a later date. Now, for the topic of today, what are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? It's a very broad topic. It's not easy to summarize it in 10 minutes, so I might skip a couple of details. What's important to understand, however, is that those development goals, they've been established over a course of maybe 15 or 20 years by the Consortium of United Nations. So a lot of consultation has been done in order to come up with the key strategic points that us, practically humanity, we have to achieve by a certain date in order to make Earth a better living place for everyone. And this is important because everyone has a different perspective of what it is better and how to improve it. So the process of consultation that took, I think, about 15 years was really important to get to the stage where everyone agrees, at least more or less, of what sustainable development goals must be and what their targets are. So the official definition of sustainable development goals is the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. These goals address the global challenges that we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. And I included a link in the bottom of the page where you can read more about this. But as you can see, this blueprint allows any organization, any individual, any government on Earth to work towards achieving those goals in order to build a better future. And the importance for every organization is to align themselves in such a way that they achieve the targets that are included within those goals. there are 17 sustainable development goals in total. And I know it's a lot. And it is practically impossible for one single organization to work on all of them at once. That is widely acknowledged, and this is why it's important to identify the goals that speak to you the most, and where you as an organization or as an individual can align yourself the most. There are a few key characteristics of the goals that I think should be really kept in mind when we talk about them, and especially when we develop any sort of proposals that involve sustainable development goals. First of all, is that the goals are indivisible. You cannot just separate them and look at them independently. They are part of one blueprint. This is important to keep in mind. And they're integrated. So they're integrated one with another, and they're integrated within each other. So the way that they're arranged is that the targets that are to be achieved within a particular goal, they follow up on each other, and they kind of work together. Another part of it is that every goal has many faces to it. So for instance, and I'll show you that in an example in a couple of slides, if we take a goal like quality education, there can be many aspects to what quality education is, and depending of your location or path in life where you are at, the quality education will be defined differently and will be brought up differently for every person. So that's why that goal will have many targets, and they will have different indicators associated with them. So this is the multifaceted part of any goal. And another point about the SDGs is that they are all interconnected. Of course, this goes without saying. When we are trying to build a better future for all, we cannot just work on one thing and expect that it will not affect any other goals at the same time. By working, for instance, on one goal, you might either compromise the effort put into something else, or affect for better or for worse another few goals and their targets. And this interconnectedness is very important to keep in mind when you're designing the strategy of how you will be aligning and working on sustainable development goals. In fact, it is very well presented in this diagram, and I think it is included in the document that was provided by FRQ for this round of applications. It's a simple example of how working and aligning your organization with one SDG can affect many others. So they're all interconnected, as you can see from this diagram, and it creates essentially two things. It gives an opportunity to have impact on several goals at the same time while working on one, but at the same time, you should keep in mind that putting too much effort into one might decrease your ability to contribute to others, and that will come with some risks, and those should be properly mitigated. So just a heads up when you'll be writing your application. This aspect of SDGs will be very important, and you have to keep it in mind. Now, if we are trying to look at one goal in particular, let's have an example of the goal number 3, health and well-being. So I know that not everyone is here for applying for FRSQ, but I thought of this goal because I applied for FRSQ several times, and I think it's an excellent example of how to look at one goal and its targets. So the goal in itself is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So that means we are trying to cover essentially the whole humanity, and we are trying to make to improve their health indicators. So the goal is associated with 13 targets, and every target has indicators. Let me just move this thing over here, and you can find on the website of Sustainable Development Goals. Every goal is broken down into its targets and indicators, so you have no problem navigating the whole landscape. In the case of goal number 3, for instance, one of the 13 targets is by 2030 reduce by 1/3 the premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment, and promote mental health and well-being. It's a very ambitious goal. But the indicators associated with that target are the mortality rate attributed to various cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, or cancer. And the second one is suicide mortality rate. So this is essentially how UN decided to look at this. If we want to achieve this target, we should work on those areas and find creative ways in order to reduce the premature mortality rates. The other 12 targets are divided in a very similar manner. They all have indicators associated with them. So it's very easy to find exactly the area on which you would like to work on, and to communicate to United Nations what was your contribution. So I'm running a little bit short of time. I think I have like 2 minutes left. I just wanted to give you one example of Pfizer and how they use SDGs in order to achieve better future for everyone. So of course, they are focusing primarily on the goal number 3, so good health and well-being. But as I was saying, since all SDGs are interconnected, and Pfizer, they are a very big company, it's a huge pharma, they have various sorts of operations ongoing, from manufacturing to delivery, sales, and global presence. They can affect multiple goals at the same time. And this is how, just by working on global health, good health and well-being, they affect 6 additional goals. And they're trying to positively contribute to all of them at the same time. And if you want to read more about it, here is the link. It's their investors report, where they outline exactly how they achieve it. And finally, in the case of the application here, if you want to talk about the concrete things, you probably noticed that it's in the FRSQ application, for instance, the goals should be integrated in the 4 parts of the research proposal: training, research proposal per se, a science-society dialogue, and social engagement. So I really invite you to read about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and to see how you can connect the dots between what you are planning to do in your research, in your individual social engagement, about which Danielle and Sean will be talking more, and how you can connect some of those SDGs with what you are planning to do in the next couple of years. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. I know I've been very quick about this broad topic, and good luck with the applications. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that wonderful overview. That gets us right started into this topic. If there was, like maybe we could take one question if there was a question in the chat, and otherwise we'll hold them until the end because we will have that opportunity to open up breakout rooms so you can go and ask individual questions. So if there was a question specifically on the UN SDGs, we could take it now. Maybe I'll let Danielle get her presentation ready while we do so. I don't think any question yet. People take a bit of a minute to type often. So we're gonna, let's move on because I want to keep our speakers having the time to, yes, okay, that's a good question. So one question here, do we need to speak directly to these goals, meaning using their names or language used by the UN? What would be your advice on that? And
look, the purpose here is to communicate to the granting agency that you understand the purpose of UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you understand how you can contribute, and that this contribution can be realistic. So my take on that would be that, yes, you have to talk directly about those. You have to mention, for instance, the goal that you would like to contribute to, and you have to rationalize how you will do it. Because in my honest opinion, this is what the reviewers will be looking for. And we can discuss it in more details after the session, but I think, yeah.
That seems to be what they're asking for specifically, is that you be direct about what you're gonna do. So great, thank you very much. Good question. Okay, so we'll move on. And again, there'll be time in the breakout rooms to further those discussions. Danielle, I will leave it to you.
Can everyone first just confirm that you can see my screen okay? Great. So hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Maiden. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be talking today about citizen engagement as a grad student. I'm joining you today from Jojage or Montreal, and I'm on the unceded lands of the Ghanaian Gahaga. I also have closed captions at the bottom of my presentation if you find those helpful. So before I begin, I like to begin my presentations by disclosing where I'm coming from, because that informs what I'm going to say. So I recently graduated from the integrated program in neuroscience at McGill. I was at the Montreal General Hospital. I'm also the co-founder of 2 nonprofit organizations that I'll talk more about today. And finally, I currently work as a science strategist at the CIHR Institute of Gender and Health. I also want to recognize that I'm going to be talking about a lot of extracurricular activities that I did, and those are often things that are unpaid. And I want to recognize that I've had privilege as a middle-class person to be able to take part in these activities during my training. And I recognize that not everyone has that opportunity, and there are definitely ways that you can get paid for these things. And if that's something you're interested in, we can talk about it more in the breakout rooms. So my objectives for today are firstly to share examples of some of the engagement activities I've been part of, to try and connect these examples to some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to give some brief tips on balancing engagement and grad school, and finally provide some reflections on what engagement has brought me personally and professionally. So I'll start with probably the simplest one is my research. So my research focused on improving care and quality of life for brain injured patients. So specifically, I looked at brain networks and how we could use those as a prognostic tool. And the most clear link to the SDGs is the one that Dimitri just presented. So number 3, good health and well-being. and reducing premature mortality from non-communicable disease. Of course, as Dimitri mentioned, there are multiple SDGs that could be linked to this. So I'm just going to give one, and we can talk about it more if you'd like to later. But as part of my research, I was really interested in writing. So I wrote a few articles for the quote unquote lay audience because I wanted to share what I was learning and studying with the public. A lot of those articles did not see the light of day, but one of them was published on a blog called Massive Science, which accepts articles from graduate students and scientists. And I wrote about the tool I was using called EEG and some of the inequities that existed in that research. I also had the opportunity through the Royal Canadian Institute for Science to take over their social media account for a week and talk about my research with their audience, which includes researchers, but also members of the public who are interested in science and museums in Canada. If that's something you're interested in, I know that they're still doing this, so I can definitely put you in touch if you'd like to get involved in that kind of thing. And then next, I'm going to talk about some of the things that weren't directly linked to my research and try to explain how you can kind of think about yourself as an individual, not just what you're studying in the lab. So during the first semester of my graduate studies, I was part of Scientista McGill, which is an organization that aims to promote gender equity in STEM. And so this is linked to SDG number 5, which focuses on gender equality, ending discrimination against women and girls, and ensuring women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for leadership. So when I started, I was just managing the social media accounts for the organization, kind of talking about some of the issues that women in STEM face. And after a semester doing that, I was promoted to be the co-director of the organization. So a lot of the transferable skills that I learned there were also applicable in my research and my eventual career. So I learned how to manage a team, how to run events and programs, how to fundraise, and I got to meet a lot of really interesting people. So this was a club at McGill. So I would suggest if you are involved in any clubs, maybe thinking of how they relate to the SDGs, or if there are any clubs that interest you, you could maybe consider getting involved in some of those. Next, I got involved in an organization called Neurotech X, which has a chapter at McGill. And this is a group that aims to promote interdisciplinary research and make technology more accessible. So they provide groups of students at different universities with tools to do their own neuroscience kind of projects. So we had programmers, we had neuroscientists, we had psychologists, like people in psychology, and we could come up with any project we wanted using those tools, and we would compete against other universities. And McGill's team is actually really, really strong. I know not everyone here is at McGill, but I'm a little biased. We won the competition, I think, 3 years in a row. So it was really fun. When I joined, I was part of the research team. So I helped read scientific articles and help adapt that to our project. And that was linked to the research I was doing in neuroscience. And then my second year, I was in charge of the data collection team. So I helped to train people to set up EEG electrodes. And we were really successful that year. We actually were interviewed by the media. We got to go to the Google headquarters and present our project to them. So it was honestly a really great experience. And when I went into it, I did not expect that to come out of it. So that's another thing I'd say, is that sometimes you might get involved with something just because it's interesting and you don't really know where it will lead. It can have an impact on your research, on your career path. We even wrote a publication about our work. So definitely was worthwhile. And I linked it to SDG number 9 because it has a sub goal, which is to enhance scientific research and encourage innovation and sustainability to increase the number of research and development workers. And I think that aligns with this project because we had a lot of students from different disciplines, some of them not even in STEM, who were getting exposed to research and really leading their own research and pursued it further after the activity. So the next activity I was involved in is it's an organization I co-founded called Cycom Collective. And so this was a group of grad students at my university who wanted to be more involved in science communication and weren't really sure where to get training to do that. And we also felt that the way science is being communicated was not always inclusive or equitable for everybody. So we decided to found an organization whose mission was to provide inclusive science communication training for graduate student researchers. And so we hosted events and workshops, and then COVID happened, but we continued to do those things online. Again, I learned to manage a team, to run programs, to fundraise, obviously to communicate because that was our focus. And we also had the opportunity to apply for a grant through this. And so that was also something that I didn't expect to come out of it. And that is a translational skill that is also applicable to my research. I linked this one to SDG number 10, reduced inequalities. And coming back to Dimitri's point, I could link this also to science and innovation. I could link it to improved education. But I chose to focus on reduced inequalities because our mission really focuses on looking at equity and inclusion in science communication for people irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, etc. And the last one I wanted to mention is something I got involved in during my last semester as a grad student. So it was during COVID, trying to do research with people without going to the lab in person. So I had a little bit more spare time on my hands. And with everything that happened in 2020 in terms of social justice movements and widely mediatized acts of racial violence, a group of Black neuroscientists on Twitter kind of came together, and we decided to organize a week where we would focus on promoting the work of Black scholars in the neurosciences. And it was widely successful, and we decided to go from there and continue doing activities, and we've co-founded an organization. So there's a picture of our team, which many of whom I have not met in person, but some of whom are in Montreal and who I've met. And again, I learned a lot about running programs and events and fundraising, but this was on a much larger scale. And I would say that I credit a lot of this experience to the job I have now and to the people that I'm connected with today. And again, I've linked that to reduce inequalities, specifically relating to race, but it is also linked to some of the other SDGs because we're trying to promote and uplift researchers in their careers and kind of increase the scientific workforce. So those are some examples, and I'm happy to talk about any of those in the breakout rooms. If there's anything you saw there that you'd like to get involved in, we can definitely chat about it. And then I just have a couple more points about balancing engagement and grad school. I want to start by saying that balance is not always perfect. It's very hard to achieve. These are things that worked for me, but I was in no way always in balance. There were times when I was very overwhelmed. I had too much on my plate. And so this is just like tips, but I'm sure that you're going to have to figure it out as well for yourself. But the first big one for me is being honest with your PI or your supervisor. I know that not everyone has the same relationship with their PI, but as much as possible, being honest with them about what you would like to be involved in or what skills that you like to learn during your degree. And as much as possible, if they are, a PI who is a good mentor, they will try to help you. So for example, I told my PI that I was interested in writing and I wanted to learn to write to audiences other than scientific audiences. And she was very supportive of that and helped introduce me to opportunities where I could write these kinds of articles. And I think it just made it easier because, for example, if I had to take a little bit time out of the lab to present at an event or do something, she was very open to that. So I would have that conversation with your PI if you can, and they might even be able to connect you with opportunities that you haven't heard of. The next one would be prioritizing causes that you care about. So I know this is a criteria on the FRQ application and you have to write something, but it's going to be a lot easier if you think about things that you actually care about and want to do. So I would strongly recommend not just writing something because you have to fill out the section, but thinking about, what are the issues you care about? What are the issues that affect you as a scientist, as an individual? And it's going to make it a lot easier for you to write and for you to actually implement during your degree. And then the last one would be setting boundaries and learning to say no. Of course, like your first job is, being a grad student and, getting your thesis done. So when you're really excited about some of these goals, you might, get a little distracted or want to get, super involved in a bunch of things. And it's okay to say no. It's okay to kind of back out and remember that, your priority is your research. And again, I think prioritizing causes you care about helps with that. So yeah, just remember that it's okay to say no to things. In terms of what I've gained, the goal of these 2 slides is kind of to convince you that this is not just for the FRQ application, it's actually going to be beneficial for you as a scientist and as an individual. So personally, it helped me a lot figure out what my motivation was, my purpose. Like I know that doing research is very frustrating a lot of the time. And so sometimes it's hard to see what the end goal is or why you're doing all these experiments. So it helps to give you some kind of motivation, external to your research project. It also helped me a lot in clarifying what my interests were. So I knew as a grad student that I loved my research, but I had no idea what I was going to do next. And so this helped me explore different opportunities and interests and narrow down what I might like to do after graduation. And then finally, connecting you with mentors, and I would even say friends. So I've met a lot of people through these activities, and I'm by no means an extrovert. I am a very introverted person, but I've been able to connect with people because of these common causes that we had. And that's obviously very beneficial for you, both professionally and personally. In terms of professionally, just by being involved in these things, opportunities to come up. So I'm speaking at this event today. I've been invited to speak at other events. And this is something that looks good regardless of what career you're planning on, whether it's in academia or elsewhere. It's good practice. Building your network. So I mentioned mentors, but also professional network, knowing people outside of your area of research, outside of academia can be really beneficial. And I've tried to list as much as possible some of the transferable skills that I've learned. These, again, regardless of what you plan on doing, are going to be beneficial for you. And it allows you to practice some of the skills you might be learning in the lab, but in a different context. And finally, as I said, I'm currently working at the CIHR Institute of Gender and Health. And I think a lot of the experience I talked about in my interview and on my CV came from these things that I was involved in throughout my degree. And so, even if you do plan on staying in academia, it's just good to have more diversity of experience. And I think it will help you moving forward. So some final take-home questions for you. I would invite you to think about what you care about beyond your research. What social issues influence you as a scientist, as an individual? What transferable skills you might like to learn during your degree, and who you might like to connect with beyond your lab. And these can help you maybe think of what you might like to get involved in. And I also wanted to end with a reminder that science doesn't exist in a vacuum. So whatever your research project is, the world that we live in is influencing your science and how you do it, and vice versa. So try to remember that as you're thinking through this question. So thank you for your time. And I've put my contact info here. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, and also for the 2 organizations I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing your experience. I think probably everybody on the call understands why immediately when we saw this section, you came to mind for us in terms of somebody who would have a lot of valuable experience to share. So thank you so much. I noticed there's a question in the chat, but I wondered, Danielle, if you might take it up in the chat and maybe give your perspective on it. And we'll move on for Sean and Vanessa's section on increasing dialogue and society.
Okay, so I believe this is a joint presentation between me and Sean, and I'm going to do the first part of it. We've already introduced ourselves, so we can kind of move on from that. Before we get into it, I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. And, as I mentioned, I work in the Office of the Chief Science Advisor. So science advice is what we do. And it's important to remember that that Indigenous and traditional knowledge and lived experience shouldn't be disregarded when it comes to information that goes into guiding policy, and indeed should be incorporated. So our office, some of the work that we do goes toward trying to understand and do that better. So, okay, so with that, I actually do advanced slides for other people in my office sometimes, and this is the first time I've had someone else advance my slides, so this is kind of cool for me. Okay, so some of the things that I want to talk about really build on a lot of the excellent points that Danielle has already brought up. We're all here mostly because we've been prompted by this new requirement that's part of the FRQ fellowship applications. But I would invite you to think a little bit about, to ask yourself some questions to help guide you towards, what kind of activities you think you might want to engage in. So, well, on that, I want to mention 2 points. One, as Danielle mentioned, science, as she said, science doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think there's kind of this outdated thinking that as scientists, we do our experiments and we generate knowledge, and then someone else will take that knowledge and apply that to other sectors in society. And I think, we understand now that simply isn't true. And I think we've seen plenty examples of this throughout the pandemic. So I think it's incumbent upon us to think about how we can be a little bit more involved in our communities outside of our research labs. And the second thing is that it may help to think about these engagements as opportunities for professional development. For myself personally, the position that I have now in the Office of the Chief Science Advisor came about through the networks that I developed during my time in my PhD, through the work that I was doing outside of the lab. So, I think a lot of us come into our degrees with an interest to be in academic research, and the reality is most of us will not end up there. So, it is of tremendous benefit for us to think about what other things we'd be interested in, and also develop the skills that might be required for those kind of non-academic career opportunities. Okay, so with that, thinking about how to decide what kind of activities you want to engage in. Again, a few questions you want to ask yourself: what kinds of audience you want to engage with, and what level of interaction you are looking for. So, oh, thank you. So, here I have taken the liberty of, listing out some different forms of engagement or different forms that dialogue with society can take. If we start from the left, again, this is a non-exhaustive list, of course, but if you start from the left side of the slide, this first kind of box is really about education and outreach. So if you're somebody who likes to share your work with a broader audience outside of, an academic crowd, this might be where you want to live, and in this box, like I said, you can think about what kind of the size of audience that you would like to speak to. You know, you might want to be co-organize a kind of a large scale public forum. Sean will have some examples to share about that later on. You may simply want to write about your research or other scientific topics to a broad audience. Or you may want to do something a little bit more intimate and visit, you know, high schools or elementary schools to engage with younger students and get them excited about science. Or an example from my own PhD. So as I mentioned, I worked on cancer biology. So I, you know, really enjoyed talking to cancer patients and their families and sharing some of the knowledge that was coming out of the research that I was doing. So those are kind of examples of the more educational piece, if that is something you're interested in. And then in the middle, this is kind of like what I would consider to be kind of a medium-sized audience that you would be working with. So this can include science cafes, and by that I really just mean kind of interactive discussion groups with smaller groups of either your peers or other community members. It could be consulting the communities that your research is looking at, or that your research will impact. Or it could be training workshops. So one example of this might be developing training workshops for science communication for your peers, for other students, and helping to build capacity in other people to share their research beyond an academic audience. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we also wanted to include examples of policy engagement, because this is really about wanting to use your science or your knowledge of the scientific environment or scientific method to make a change in policy. So this could be attending and participating in stakeholder meetings. This could be joining a science advocacy organization, or you could join advisory groups, science advisory groups, or you could go all the way to kind of meeting your local, provincial, or federal elected officials and sharing your research with them for a kind of trying to achieve a particular outcome. So, you know, like I said, this is non-exhaustive, but I kind of, we just kind of wanted to give you an overview of the types of engagement that you could participate in, and kind of thinking about, again, the size of audience and the level of interaction that you're comfortable with, that you would like to develop skills in, or that, you know, your availability or resources allow. Next slide, please. So here is kind of a smattering of organizations that can help you with the engagement that you're interested in. I won't go through all of them. Feel free to kind of like take a screenshot of this slide and follow up, do a bit of Googling afterwards, or ask me and Sean. We would be able to tell you more about any of these. I will point out maybe a little bit biased here, Science and Policy Exchange, which is the organization that Sean and I were very involved in together during our PhD. And that organization is a student-run nonprofit in Montreal, and it does touch on kind of all three of these buckets. So that's a good option to check out if you just want a starting point. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I wanted to end this presentation just by quickly zooming in on the last bucket, the engaging with policymakers, because I think that's typically the box that students are least familiar with. So I just wanted to unpack that a little bit very quickly here, so that you have a little bit more understanding about what we're talking about. So science policy, what is that, right? This is kind of the classic breakdown that people typically talk about when we're talking about science policy. So first there's science for policy. This one is pretty straightforward. This is like scientific evidence that is used to inform policy decisions or used to make for science advice, basically. Policy for science is more to do with the policy that enables science to happen. So this could be funding, priorities and strategies, coordination, infrastructure, that sort of thing. And then science advocacy is about kind of scientists or science groups, science-affiliated groups that are applying pressure externally to push for a certain outcome. Next slide, please. So, okay, so with that kind of very foundational knowledge, like if you want to get involved in science policy, like where do you start if you want to engage with decision makers? So, my advice at this point would really be to connect with organizations that are already doing this work, because they would be able to provide you with the information, the connections, the training if needed, to kind of get started in this area. If you really wanted to kind of just strike out on your own, you definitely can. Here are kind of in the middle here, a list of possible actors kind of within the ecosystem that you could connect with, depending on what your goals are. I would also recommend that you want to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve and who might be the right person to talk to. If you want to make, for example, influence a policy that's being made in government, the elected representative themselves may not be kind of the most effective person to contact. For example, maybe you want to talk to their policy advisor in their office. That person might be, well, one will be more accessible, have more time to meet with you, and also, have the trust and ear of the politician who would be able to kind of cast the vote in government later on. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand it over to Sean, who will be able to give you kind of some more concrete examples of the types of activities that I've been talking about. Do I have one more slide, Sean? Oh, yeah, okay, so these are just, the places you can find me in case you want to follow up with more questions.
So I'll leave this up for another couple seconds for anybody who wants to jot down Vanessa's contact. Meantime, I'm being joined by my friend Pixel here, who always tends to know when I'm about to give a presentation. All right, so I wanted to basically follow up on this with some practical examples of how Vanessa and I'm going to say also this is with an organization called Science Policy Exchange. This is not just the two of us. This was with 30, 40 volunteers being active, participating in different events. Vanessa and I weren't necessarily involved in all of these either, but it's to provide a bit of an illustrative example of the types of engagement that are possible. Of course, it's a very science policy centric, but the same kind of engagement is possible towards something that's either industry or private sector, public sector. It's not necessarily specific to policy. So very quickly, so Science Policy Exchange was originally a student group at McGill, eventually became a nonprofit, and now is a Canada-wide charity. It's just turned 10 recently. Really what SPE is a platform that builds capacity for the next generation to get engaged in science policy. It produces and disseminates resources for the next generation of researchers that are produced by the next generation of researchers. And it really tries its best to engage with stakeholders and rights holders across science policy and society to try to amplify that kind of dialogue. So really have just a couple of slides that are focused on a few key points. One of the main ones, Danielle already covered this, is it's really important to just look at what you can do in terms of starting a dialogue on a topic that really matters to you. The kind of events that have been run, for example, at Science Policy Exchange, Vanessa mentioned sort of Science Cafe. We wrote a very, very short background document, invited students, members of the public to join into a discussion about, for example, gender barriers in STEM. There were also discussions about climate, about zero waste cities, and quite a lot of other topics. Fundamentally, like this can be pitched as something that's very, very high level. This is a consultation that comes out with a report that we can send over to policymakers. It sounds very, very nice, but fundamentally, it's a fun night in a coffee shop and a little bit of writing before and after. So a lot of this can sound very, very promising in an application like you would for the FRQ, but a lot of this is actually fairly straightforward to organize, especially if you've got a few friends to help you along. And I'm including little SDG snippets on the right side of the slide to kind of show what aligns with what here. Another example is larger consultations that we did. We saw that there was a lot of discussions about the future of STEM education in Canada, about how we can rethink the PhD. This was back in 2015. A lot of the recommendations out of this ended up at the FRQ. I'm not sure if they informed this new direction or not. But we had the chief scientist of Quebec, the chief scientist of New Zealand come together with a group of students, a group of experts, to really talk about where we're going. And we wrote a white paper out of this, which was presented at the Canadian Science Policy Conference. And like Danielle said, this kind of stuff also tends to bring you opportunities later on. And in 2019, I had the opportunity to present to a group of parliamentarians of MPs, not only about issues that are being faced by PhDs, by master's students, by postdocs, but also about my own research. It's kind of a nice coalescence. In terms of advocating for science and society, there's a lot of events that you can already get involved with. There's things like the March for Science. Obviously, it hasn't happened through the COVID-19 pandemic, but this has happened more or less a few years before that in Montreal, as well as other cities. So we, for example, participated in the Science March, and Vanessa and I both gave a bit of a talk about science advocacy in 2018. We also, through Science Policy Exchange, did a lot of engagement with MPs directly. We did very small video interviews, which was really just reaching out to MPs, inviting them to Thompson House at McGill with a video camera, a student who's really ready to ask some questions. The MPs were very, very willing to talk, and posted this on YouTube and promoted it to just try to build excitement and try to build engagement about science and its importance in policy. And then kind of an extension of this is now this votescience.ca campaign, which SP, along with a few other organizations like Evidence for Democracy, led for the 2019 and now again for the 2021 elections to try to, again, raise the profile of science in those kinds of discussions. And then there's much more massive endeavors. Vanessa and I were co-leads on a federal budget campaign in 2018, where we collected signatures from students across Canada on an open letter to the Prime Minister and to Ministers of Science, of Innovation, Minister of Finance, to really try to hammer home the importance of science funding for Canada, for students, for the well-being of all. So there's a large kind of range of types of activities that you can really get involved with. And if there's a topic that interests you, if you're not an expert in it, if it's even something that may be only tangentially related to what you're working on, that doesn't mean that you can't spark a dialogue about it. So you can quite easily bring the experts to you. One of the major examples of this is the public forums that we put together with Science Policy Exchange. Again, these maybe sound like big events, but fundamentally we got an auditorium for free in the McIntyre building at McGill. We reached out to senators, to researchers, to people that work with the public, such as genetic counselors, to basically bring these folks together, invite the public, and just have a discussion about something that is really hot in the media at the time, or something that we think deserves a bit more discussion. So in 2017, we did these two forums around the increasing popularity of 23andMe and personal genetic tests, about, well, what does this mean? What is the impact on regulation? At the time, there was also a genetic non-discrimination bill that was being passed in the Senate. And we thought it was a good opportunity to really raise awareness about that and talk about it, what it means. One of the interesting elements of this is we're actually able to apply to a CIHR planning and dissemination grant to fund this event. And that's actually a PI grant that you can hold as a student or as a postdoc, which is a fairly rare opportunity. And we did this again in follow-up years. Immediately the next year, we ran several forums on drug policy at the time when Canada was considering legalizing cannabis, to bring people together to talk about, well, what does this mean for Canada? What is the science on the impact of cannabis on developing human brains? What would be the impact of legalizing this on racialized communities and reducing inequalities in Canada? So trying to really build that, and it was a fairly straightforward process to reach out to folks. This is something that these experts often want to talk about what they do, especially if it's students organizing. There tends to be a lot of willingness to come together. And also on zero waste and lots of other topics. And finally, kind of at the higher level, you can also participate or lead and organize symposiums and workshops. We organized with SPE, and you can kind of see our logo before we rebranded back in 2013 or 14. We did whole conferences on the state of innovation in Canada, brought in speakers from Canada, from the US, and ran even larger events in 2018 around the G7. We ran a workshop around the SDGs to really do a simulation around the Arctic Council, get students involved. We even got funds to bring in Indigenous students from Northern Canada to participate in the discussion. And we hosted a really international symposium with international speakers to bring people together to talk about the role that students can play in furthering science diplomacy. This was probably one of the largest events that SP's ever run, but even just participating in this kind of thing, even if you're not organizing it, is a way to increase your comfort level, your skills, and your ability to speak at the intersection of science and society. And on its own can be something that's very, very positive to talk about in this kind of application. There's also some opportunities that you can seize right now if you're looking for what to write in an application that might be due in a week or so. So firstly, I'm still on the board of Science Policy Exchange. We're about to host elections. There's a lot of positions available at various volunteer levels, various amounts of engagement and amount of time commitment. So, look out for that if this kind of thing is something that interests you. There is a workshop that's being held on Monday about in French on EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, and best practices, and really bringing the student voice into that discussion. Si vous êtes confortable en français, l'ACFAS, c'est une grande conférence. Ça fait presque 100 ans que l'ACFAS existe. Je suis aussi sur le comité organisateur de l'ACFAS. Les appels de proposition pour des communications libres sont ouverts en ce moment. Donc, vous pouvez même appliquer pour, au préalable, présenter votre recherche dans une communication qui est libre au public et aux chercheurs d'autres disciplines pour parler de votre recherche d'une façon plus ouverte. Et ils ont aussi leur plateforme raccourcie qui donne des astuces pour comment parler de votre science, comment communiquer avec des différentes personnes. And also, I'm with NSERC, so I should mention NSERC is currently running Science Literacy Week, which runs until Sunday. So there are lots of events that you can still participate in, or simply just look through the kind of events that are being run. It's things that are as simple as people working with their local libraries to host events and talking about some of their research, or just something really fundamental of how do trees grow, and doing workshops for kids. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved. You can use that to maybe get inspired. There's also other large festivals like Science Odyssey that usually happen in May of every year. And ACFAS and NSERC co-run something called the Science Exposed, La Preuve par l'image, where you can submit a picture from your research, and if you win the contest, could get featured, for example, in the streets of Ottawa, right near Parliament, which is definitely a primo thing to list on an FRQ application or any other application. I still have a couple seconds. I want to kind of rewind a bit, because almost everything that's here was before I even applied to FRQ, and probably after I wasn't no longer eligible to apply for FRQ as a student. So I want to kind of turn back the clock to 2013 of where I was at the time and how I would have pitched what I was doing with kind of this new section, and actually reopened my FRQ application from back then to, which was a little bit cringy, but to see where it was at. So big picture, my thesis is on cancer metabolism, looking at a lot of different areas of cancer metabolism, different stages of breast cancer progression. As much as I can talk about this and, all the impacts it can have on health and that kind of thing, fundamentally, what am I actually doing? I'm looking at a not even a transcription factor, a co-transcription factor that works with other transcription factors that has various roles. And really, what did I do as part of that? At this point in 2013, I had some data that showed that it might regulate a pathway. And that was about the extent of the amount of scientific work that I'd done at the time. But you could talk about this in terms of SDG 3. This is building towards good health and well-being, and you could talk about that in the proposal. The type of activities I was involved with before starting my PhD, I was a peer tutor in chemistry, math, and English. I fundraised for organizations like World Vision. One of the bigger things that I did, I volunteered with an organization called Student Suffering Support during my undergrad at McGill. I think we still have a chapter there, which basically raises funds through offering essentially peer tutoring, but to raise funds for projects in Central and South America. And I actually participated in 2 projects in Panama and Nicaragua to help to, one, build a bridge for teachers to be able to reach a school, another one to build a cafeteria and plant a massive garden to entice parents to send their kids to school because they get a square meal every day by sending them there. I was involved with my local student society as a treasurer. I organized a career night by that point, which I thought was something that would be relevant to mention. And all of this SBE stuff, I had been involved with SBE for about a week at that point. I had literally just signed up. I had just attended a conference and I thought it sounded cool. But, you know, I could talk about, you know, I'm now involved with this. I could talk about the mandate, as part of the FRQ application, you could talk about what you want to do in the next year. So at that point, we were just thinking about this conference on the future, on the state of innovation. So I pitched to organize a panel on patents and open source technology, looking at questions of open science in this. And in my FRQ application at the time, I had, I think, one line about this. And I think at this point, with how it is now, I'd probably have about 2 or 3 paragraphs. And at the time, our friend Dimitri also convinced me to get involved in entrepreneurship. And we were just about to start a team to apply to something called the Breast Cancer Startup Challenge, which would have involved essentially pitching a breast cancer prognostic test, which essentially relates somewhat back to my research because I was working on breast cancer research as well. And could lead to translation of research back into society through essentially an applied research product that would eventually make it to the clinic. Spoiler, it did not, but it was still a good idea at the time. I'm still glad Dimitri wrote me into it. So how would I kind of go about this? The first couple of things, basically up until SPE, I would consider as just being an engaged person because they weren't really science related. But I could really talk about, trying to bring forward quality education. One of the projects had to do with planting gardens. I have another meeting after this, apparently. And building a sustainable community. The career night, helping people to think about their jobs has to do with, economic growth. And then the panel I was thinking of organizing it to do with innovation. And through the entrepreneurship kind of loops well back into the good health and well-being. So potentially developing a nice story to pitch through this. So I think we're probably way over time, so I'm going to end it there. But this is how to get in touch with me. And thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Vanessa and Sean are 2 people, who have been, I think you can tell from all of this, really deeply involved in science engagement, science policy, and they've given some really concrete ideas and ways on how to operationalize this session. So I really appreciate that. What we want to do with the next 15 minutes, well, we might actually stop the recording now, Christina, if that's possible. I know we have a few questions coming up in the chat.